Hey guys, tonight we begin with something special. This is a journey into a quieter corner of the past, a place where history does not roar with cannons or march with kings, but drifts softly through candlelight and whispers. Here, stories move slowly, their voices low and careful, as though afraid to disturb the stillness that once filled the rooms they remember. Before we begin, take a deep breath and let your thoughts settle like dust in an old library. You're safe here. Nothing rushes in these halls of memory, and if your eyes grow heavy as the story unfolds, that's all right. This is a tale meant to be listened to with half a waking heart. If you enjoy these quiet stories, consider tapping like and subscribing so that more of these forgotten corners might find their way back into the light. And in the comments, tell me where you are and the time you're listening. It's a comfort, isn't it, to imagine tiny lights glowing across the map, each one of us keeping watch over the same gentle past. Now, let us walk together, softly, into the hush where it all began. In the soft gloom of a flickering candle, a feather quill scratches across parchment, and somewhere beyond the heavy oak door, a clock ticks forks with patient certainty. This is the hour when the world sleeps, and only the quietest souls remain awake. The watchmen, the scribes, and the keepers of coin. The counting houses of old were sanctuaries of silence, where the weight of gold and silver was measured not in riches, but in trust. Yet even here, in the hush of polished floors and ledgers bound in calfskin, the air hums with whispers. For where treasure gathers, shadows follow. And in those shadows, the first great heists of history began, not with a shout, nor the clatter of blades, but with the careful turning of a key, the subtle lift of a latch, and the soft breath of someone who knows they should not be there. In the medieval cities of Europe, when kingdoms were rising and merchants sailed seas for spice and silk, wealth no longer glittered in crowns alone. It rested in chests sealed with wax, in bags of coins counted by candlelight, guarded by men who thought the locks they forged were strong enough to hold human desire at bay. But locks are made of metal, and metal can be turned. The first whispers of theft were almost delicate. Clerks who rearranged numbers, merchants who counted twice what they had once tallied, porters who slipped a single coin from every purse they carried. Small thefts, like drops in an endless river, barely noticed, yet endlessly flowing. And from these drops, an ocean of ambition grew. There were tales, half remembered, of a counting house in Bruges where the ledgers themselves told lies. A merchant prince awoke to find his fortune vanished, not by sword or siege, but by ink and candlelight. A clerk who turned sums to dust, and in the silence of a single night, walked away into the fog with wealth enough to buy a crown. No alarm sounded, no guard gave chase. Only the faint smell of tallow, and the pages turned blank by deceit. For in the earliest heists, there were no masks, no carriages racing through narrow streets. There was only trust, and the slow unravelling of it. As trade grew, so too did the halls of money. Counting houses stood like temples in the heart of every city, each ledger a scripture of commerce, each coin a prayer to fortune. But every temple has its heretic, and every fortune its hungry eyes. In the ports of Venice, merchants whispered of phantom ships, vessels that docked in darkness, loaded their cargo, and slipped away before dawn, leaving behind only empty crates and stunned stevedores. In London, a vault was found unlatched one misty morning, its shelves swept bare as if the wind itself had stolen the silver. And in the alleys of Antwerp, thieves walked unseen, guided not by violence but by patience, the careful study of habits, the memorizing of footsteps, the listening at doors. These were not the brigands of dusty roads, nor the cut-purses of markets. They were artisans of silence, craftsmen of shadows. Their tools were not daggers, but keys. Not brute force, but knowledge. Knowing when the guard grew drowsy, when the clerk turned away, when the master of the house was lost in dreams. The heist was born not in chaos, but in calm. It began with observation, with the quiet devotion of one who knows the rhythm of the world and waits for its weakest beat. And so, through the centuries, as coins became crowns and crowns became currencies, the whispers grew louder. For the great cities of the world, Florence, Seville, London, were not merely built on trade, but on temptation. Gold locked in vaults, jewels sealed behind bars, and always someone watching, someone waiting, someone wondering if the lock could be turned just once, and never again. In the stillness of the counting house, we glimpse the seed of every great theft to come, from the tunnels of Paris to the vaults of Boston, from the railways that carried fortunes through night to the galleries that cradled art like relics of eternity. All of them began here, in this quiet place, where human faith in locks first met human hunger for what lay behind them. There is something haunting about that silence, a kind of reverence. The counting house, with its polished tables and heavy ledgers, is not merely a room, it is a stage, and in the hush before dawn, the players enter, the keeper with his keys, the clerk with his pen, the stranger who waits in shadow. No one speaks, no one must. The language of the heist is silence. A hand gloved in leather, a candle snuffed, a lock turned backwards. Each sound a note in a quiet symphony that ends with an open chest and an empty shelf. What drives such a hand? Greed, perhaps, but more than greed, curiosity. The yearning to know how far the unseen door can open, how deep the secret chamber lies. The first thieves were not always villains. Some were merely dreamers who mistook fortune for fate, who looked upon a vault and saw not property, but possibility. And so the story begins, not with gunpowder or alarms, but with whispers. In these dimly lit rooms, by the light of trembling candles, the art of the heist is born. It breathes softly, like a secret. It grows in the spaces between trust and doubt, between promise and temptation. Soon the counting houses will give way to palaces, the chests to carriages, the ledgers to safes and vaults. The thieves will grow bolder, the treasures grander, but the heart of it, that quiet moment when the world holds its breath and a lock turns in darkness, will remain the same. For in every age, the greatest heists are not about what is taken, but how. The hush before discovery, the stillness after, the strange, almost sacred beauty of absence. And as the candle burns low and the ink dries, the counting house sleeps, unaware that its silence has already been broken, that its whispers will echo across centuries, through tunnels and skies, through galleries and banks, through every chamber that ever believed itself safe. The heist, after all, is not merely a crime, it is a mirror, reflecting the dreams we lock away, and the quiet, patient hands that one night may come to claim them. In a city where every stone carried a secret, and every fresco whispered of heaven, Florence slept beneath a velvet sky. The bells of Santa Maria del Fiore had long ceased their echo, leaving the streets to the hush of moonlight and the faint rustle of cloaks brushing marble walls. Yet beneath that silence, in the heart of the city's labyrinth, something stirred. Not a cry of rebellion, nor a clang of sword, but the quiet pulse of ambition. For Florence was no ordinary city. It was a jewel cradled in the hands of merchants and bankers, its beauty gilded by gold that flowed like rivers through counting halls and vaults carved from ancient stone. Here, art and arithmetic danced together, and in their steps, fortunes rose and fell. The Medici palaces shimmered with wealth, their walls heavy with tapestries and trust, as always, invited curiosity. Beneath the floors, where patrons and painters spoke of light and grace, lay the vaults, sealed chambers of cold air and iron bars, holding coins minted from far-off kingdoms, jewels traded from the East, and ledgers inked with secrets worth more than any crown. It was said that the vaults of Florence breathed differently at night. When the city's breath slowed and the Arno mirrored the stars, the stones themselves seemed to hum, as if aware that behind their quiet facades, men dreamed not of cathedrals or poems, but of keys. The heist that would come was not born of violence, nor hatred, but of longing, the same longing that built domes and carved angels. It began with a scholar, one who understood the language of geometry and the silence of locks. His name was forgotten, as most names are when written in dust, but his mind was sharp as the tools he carried. He walked among the halls of bankers and scribes by day, studying the rhythm of doors, the turning of keys, the ways in which men trusted metal more than each other. By night, he studied shadows, how they fell across the vault walls, how torchlight revealed the faintest seams between stone. He learned patience from the city itself, for Florence was a place where nothing great was built in haste. In the months that followed, a small circle formed, artisans, thinkers, hands skilled in craft rather than cruelty. They gathered in the cellars beneath workshops, where sawdust met candle flame, whispering over sketches of locks and walls, tracing plans with fingers stained in ink. They spoke softly of opportunity, of a vault said to hold the Medici's most private treasure. Not gold alone, but letters, promises, the kind of secrets that could buy or break an empire. They did not plan to destroy, only to enter, to see the unseeable, to touch what men called untouchable. When the night finally came, Florence lay wrapped in mist. The lanterns on the Ponte Vecchio flickered faintly, and the streets glistened with the quiet damp of autumn. Cloaked figures moved through alleys like thoughts passing in sleep. No word was spoken. The vault lay beneath a merchant's palazzo, a fortress of marble and memory. Yet its strength, like all things crafted by men, had its weakness. Beneath the frescoed halls ran a corridor long sealed from use, its entrance disguised by a false wall older than the vault itself. It was through this forgotten artery that they crept, lanterns shrouded, tools wrapped in linen. Each sound mattered. The scrape of metal, the sigh of dust, the steady heartbeat that seemed to echo louder than the city's bells. Hours passed in a silence so complete it felt sacred. And then, at the turn of midnight, the first lock yielded, not broken, but persuaded, as though it too longed to be free. Inside, the air was colder. The scent of iron and parchment hung heavy. Chests lined the walls, sealed with wax, etched with sigils of families whose wealth shaped the very skyline above. Yet the thieves did not rush. They moved as monks might in a chapel, reverent, deliberate, aware that what they touched was not merely treasure, but trust itself. One chest held coins of Venice, their edges worn by countless hands. Another, strings of pearls coiled like sleeping serpents. But it was the smallest box, carved of walnut and bound in brass, that drew their gaze. Its seal bore the mark of the Medici, the silent emblem of power that ruled Florence as surely as any throne. They opened it not with force, but with care, the way one opens a secret meant to be heard only once. Inside lay scrolls and letters, their ink still dark, their words alive with promises between princes and popes, debts owed and alliances sworn. Here was the true gold of Florence, the weightless treasure of knowledge, the power of knowing what others must not. They took only what could be remembered, what could be carried in the mind and not the hand. For gold fades, but memory endures. And as dawn's first breath crept across the city, the vault closed once more, its silence restored. When the merchants returned, nothing seemed amiss. The seals were unbroken, the chests untouched, the ledgers undisturbed. Yet somewhere in the city, truths shifted. Debts were called too soon. Alliances trembled. Whispers travelled through corridors like ghosts. No one spoke of theft, for there was nothing missing, and yet something had changed. Florence continued its dance. Painters raised their brushes, builders lifted stone, poets praised the divine. But beneath it all, the echo of that midnight remained, a quiet proof that no vault is ever truly sealed, that even in a city of brilliance, shadows find their way in. The scholar vanished into history, his name lost, his work folded into the endless stories of Florence's grandeur. But those who walked the streets after nightfall sometimes felt it, that subtle hum beneath their feet, that faint vibration in the walls. The city remembered. And so the art of the heist deepened, no longer just a theft of gold, but a theft of certainty. The realization that what we guard most closely is often the easiest to take, if only one learns to listen to the silence between heartbeats. Above the vault, the bells of the cathedral began to ring, their sound rolling over rooftops like waves over stone. Morning broke, soft and golden. Florence awoke, unaware that in the stillness of the night, beneath its painted ceilings and gilded altars, a new chapter of human cunning had quietly turned. In that calm, the world learned another truth, that beauty and desire are twins, and where one blooms, the other waits, patient, silent, and always near the lock. Morning light poured across the old world like molten metal, gilding towers and domes, catching on spires that reached toward heaven. In cities where wealth had gathered like dust, gold no longer glittered in secret vaults alone. It adorned the very stones of palaces, shimmered on ceilings, clung to every curve of a painted saint. And in one such palace, a labyrinth of marble and music, the air itself seemed to hum with the weight of treasure. They called it the Palace of Gold, not for a single kingdom, but for every hall built by rulers who sought to mirror the sun. There were many, scattered across continents and centuries. In Spain, where silver from across the seas piled high. In Constantinople, where mosaics caught candlelight like captured dawn. In the courts of Persia, where every step fell upon carpets woven with fortunes. But beneath the gleam, there was always shadow. For gold, though radiant, has a way of drawing darkness close. In these palaces, servants moved like ghosts, their eyes lowered, their silence heavy. Courtiers whispered of ledgers swollen with tribute, of vaults hidden behind frescoes, of treasures locked not merely in iron, but in ritual. The rulers who slept beneath gilded ceilings believed themselves safe, guarded by armies, by walls, by the divine right that wrapped them like armour. Yet within the hush of corridors, another kind of devotion stirred, not to crowns or kings, but to opportunity. In a forgotten wing of one such palace, where dust settled thick upon unplayed instruments and tapestries faded in the dim, a plan took root. It did not begin with greed. It began with hunger, a hunger older than empire, born in the hearts of those who served. The candle-bearers, the scribes, the keepers of keys, men and women who had spent lifetimes beneath ceilings they would never own, watching fortunes pass through their hands like water. They had seen the chests carried in at dusk, sealed with wax and sigils, placed in vaults where light dared not enter. They had heard the click of locks behind which gold slept like a dragon, hoarding dreams. And in that sound lay both promise and pain, for what is guarded so fiercely becomes a song one cannot forget. So they began to listen, not to music or prayer, but to the rhythms of the palace itself, the footsteps of guards, the opening of doors, the soft sigh of the night wind against ancient stone. They learned the pulse of their world, and in that pulse they heard its weakness. The palace, though vast, was alive. And every living thing, no matter how mighty, has a moment when it must breathe. The hour came when torches burned low, when the last feast had faded into quiet, when even the watchmen nodded beneath their helms. In that breath between vigilance and slumber, the shadows began to move. They carried no weapons, only tools of silence, a key carved from wax, a lamp shrouded in cloth, a memory of every hinge and turning stair. Down they went, past frescoes of saints and emperors, through arches built to echo glory, into the belly of the palace where gold slept unseen. The vault was a marvel of its age, walls lined with hammered plates, a door of iron so thick it seemed eternal. Yet eternity bends to knowledge, and knowledge was their weapon. They found the hidden groove, the forgotten lever that shifted stone like a sigh. The door, once thought impregnable, yielded not to force, but to understanding. Inside lay a silence that felt almost holy. Coins stacked like altars, chalices encrusted with jewels, their surfaces shimmering with candlelight. Caskets of emerald and pearl, relics of conquest and devotion. But more dazzling than all was the realization that such wealth could rest untouched, while beyond the palace walls the city starved. They did not take all. They could not. The weight of gold is heavier than its shine. Instead they chose what could vanish quietly. A single chest of coins, a few gems light enough to hide within folds of cloth. Enough to alter lives, but not to summon suspicion. And when they left, they sealed the door as they had found it, leaving the palace to dream of safety once more. Days passed before the first whisper arose. A missing ledger, a discrepancy in tribute, a single bag of coin that weighed less than it should. The ruler raged, then calmed, assured by ministers that such errors were common, that fortunes so vast could not be counted to the last grain. The culprits were never named, their faces never drawn. They melted back into the city's hum, into markets and cloisters, into alleys where sunlight rarely reached. Yet in their silence, a truth was written into history, that even the brightest palace cast the deepest shadow. For the heist beneath the Palace of Gold was not merely theft, it was revelation, the moment when power learned it could be touched. In the centuries that followed, kings built thicker walls, locked doors within doors, set watchmen to pace through endless nights. But each measure birthed its countermeasure. Each barrier invited a dreamer to listen more closely, to learn the language of stone and silence. The art of the heist grew more intricate, more daring. What began in counting houses and merchant vaults now walked boldly beneath thrones. And still, it moved with grace, with patience, with the knowledge that the most precious treasures are not always those forged of metal, but of faith, the belief that safety exists at all. Outside the palace, dawn crept across rooftops glazed with dew. Bells tolled softly, calling the city to prayer. The world stirred, unaware that somewhere beneath marble and gold, trust had been gently unthreaded, one lock at a time. And so the story drifted onward, carried by footsteps across continents, following the trail of treasure and temptation wherever men sought to hold what cannot truly be held. For as long as there is gold, there will be shadows. And within those shadows, quiet hands will always reach, not only for wealth, but for the hidden door that leads beyond it, into the mystery of how something so guarded could ever be so easily taken. The road wound through a sleeping countryside, soft with mist and silence. Hooves pressed into damp earth, wheels hummed upon the stones, and within the heavy frame of the carriage, chests of coin clinked faintly, a lullaby of wealth on its journey toward the heart of the empire. London waited beyond the horizon, its chimneys dreaming smoke into the dawn, its banks preparing ledgers for numbers not yet arrived. Somewhere in those books, a clerk's neat script recorded a fortune already counted, already promised, unaware that the promise would never arrive. For on the quiet roads between city and shire, gold did not move alone. It travelled with the breath of secrecy, with the eyes of those who followed from a distance, hidden in hedgerows and woodlands, patient as the turning of the earth. In that age the empire's lifeblood flowed not through rivers, but along roads, carriages heavy with silver, sealed letters bearing the weight of trade and tax, wagons burdened with jewels bound for vaults. And though the king's mark was pressed into wax and iron, though guards rode beside with muskets slung across shoulders, no seal, no blade, no oath could silence the thought that perhaps, somewhere along the road, fortune could vanish like morning fog. The plan began not in darkness, but in routine, the repetition of journeys, the comforting rhythm of wheels along the same paths, at the same hours, by the same hands. Predictability, the quiet ally of all who wait. In a tavern far from the city, where firelight pooled upon rough tables, men spoke softly of schedules and seasons. They were not outlaws in the old sense. No banners, no bold declarations. They were craftsmen of the unseen, watchers of time and tide, who understood that wealth guarded in motion is wealth most vulnerable. For a vault stands still. A carriage must move. And to move is to risk. The chosen night was calm, the sky pale with a moon veiled in cloud. The carriage set out from the mint, with its escort of riders, each face familiar, each gesture rehearsed. They passed through sleeping villages, past fields silvered with frost, the lamps upon their coach glowing like distant stars. But the road ahead had already been touched by careful hands. Along a stretch where trees leaned close and the earth dipped low, a fallen branch lay across the path. Innocent, accidental, or so it seemed. The driver slowed, reins creaking, horses stamping softly. From the shadows came no battle cry, no rush of blades, only presence, quiet figures stepping from the mist, faces hidden, words measured. The guards reached for weapons but found hesitation heavier than steel. There was no blood, no chaos. Only the slow understanding that the road itself had turned against them. Locks were opened with practiced ease, the chests lifted down with reverence, not greed. The thieves moved like scholars completing a long-studied equation, each gesture precise, inevitable. Within moments the carriage stood lighter, its promise emptied into the waiting dark. By dawn the fortune was gone, spirited away into forests, across marshes, down paths no map recorded. The road lay silent once more, as if it had swallowed its secret whole. When word reached London, it came not as a shout, but a murmur through corridors lined with ledgers. The city awoke to absence, a sum missing from its books, a weight missing from its coffers. Questions rippled outward. Who had known? Who had planned? Who could dare such calm defiance of an empire's will? No answer came. The carriage, repaired and cleaned, would roll again. The road would welcome it, as always. Yet in every journey thereafter, the air seemed to carry an echo, the faint sound of hooves that never reached their end, the rustle of cloaks dissolving into mist. For the heist upon the London road was not only a theft of gold, but a theft of certainty. It revealed that even the most guarded paths could fold inward, that even the Empire's heartbeat could skip a beat in the silence between milestones. The men who planned it faded into legend, their names unspoken, their faces forgotten by time. Some said they scattered their prize across villages and taverns. Others whispered it was buried beneath an oak whose roots drank secrecy. Whatever the truth, the Empire's roads grew watchful. Guards doubled, locks thickened, schedules changed. But still, every wheel that turned carried a whisper, a reminder that once, on a quiet night, a fortune simply disappeared. Beyond the fields, the city grew restless. Banks tightened their ledgers, merchants weighed their trust in trembling hands. And somewhere, in the hush before dawn, a clerk dipped his pen in ink and paused. For how does one write a number that no longer exists? Time moved onward, as it always does. Carriages rolled, fortunes flowed, and London's chimneys smoked against a grey sky. Yet beneath the surface, beneath the hum of commerce and coin, the memory remained. That wealth in motion is a promise easily broken, that even in a world of maps and measures, the unknown still waits by the roadside. And so, the art of the heist began to wander. From vaults to palaces, from palaces to roads, from stillness to motion. Wherever value travelled, so too did eyes that understood the frailty of its journey. The carriage that never reached London became more than a story. It became a symbol of the spaces between trust and loss, of the silence that follows the turning of a key, of the strange beauty in the vanishing itself. Even now, when night falls over old roads and the wind carries the scent of rain, travellers speak softly of that journey. They say the mist grows thicker near the bend where the carriage slowed, that the air feels heavy there, as though the earth remembers the weight it once held. Perhaps somewhere, beneath root and stone, the gold still sleeps, not as treasure, but as testimony. A reminder that no path, however guarded, is beyond the reach of shadow, and no promise, however sealed, is ever truly safe from the patient hand of time. The city stirred before dawn, half waking, half dreaming, its rooftops drowned in a sea of pale mist. Lamps glowed faintly behind shuttered windows, their light trembling like hearts uncertain of morning. Cobblestones glistened with dew, and footsteps, soft, deliberate, traced paths no one could see. Fog has always been the friend of secrets. It erases edges, softens walls, makes the known world uncertain. And in that tender uncertainty, fortunes have slipped away, not with thunder or fire, but like breath fading into cold air. On this particular morning, as the first bells prepared to ring, a clerk approached the counting house beside the river. His key turned smoothly. The door opened to stillness. The smell of wax and ink lingered, the faint echo of yesterday's trade. Yet something in the silence was wrong. The air felt lighter, the room emptier. The ledgers waited upon their desks, their pages filled with tidy columns of sums, promises written in numbers. But when the chests were opened, they sighed only with absence. The coins, hundreds of them, days of tally and toil, had vanished. No splintered lock, no broken seal, no mark of intrusion. Only emptiness, quieter and absolute. Outside, the river drifted beneath its veil of fog, patient and pale. Barges moored along its banks swayed gently, their ropes creaking like old voices. And somewhere in that whitened distance, a truth hid, that the fortune once held within stone walls now moved unseen, carried not by horses or wagons, but by hands that knew how to travel like mist itself. It was a theft born not of force, but of knowledge. The men who planned it were not raiders, but readers. Of habits, of tides, of time, they studied the rhythm of guards, the pulse of trade, the trust placed in routine. Each morning the fog came. Each morning the city slowed. Each morning the counting house stood watch, unaware that its silence could be turned against it. When the moment came, it passed like a dream. Doors unlocked not by violence, but by keys long copied in secret. Steps muffled by the damp air. Lanterns dimmed beneath cloaks. The chests opened gently, their coins gathered as though being soothed to sleep. And then, as the bells tolled distant hours, the fog thickened, folding around them, carrying them away. By the time the city awoke, the mist had lifted, and with it, the memory of what it concealed. The investigation that followed was as fruitless as chasing smoke. Every witness spoke of nothing unusual, the same silence, the same soft light, the same sound of the river breathing against its banks. Guards swore they had heard no step. Clerks insisted no key had turned. Yet the ledgers told another story. Numbers now hollow, rows of promises broken by emptiness. Some whispered that the fog itself was to blame, that it rolled in from the sea, carrying spirits of thieves long dead. Others spoke of cunning minds who used the weather as their cloak, turning nature into an accomplice. Whatever the truth, the lesson lingered, that the greatest thefts are often those no one truly sees. The city tried to move on. New coins replaced the old, new locks were forged, new oaths sworn. Yet trust, once shaken, does not settle easily. Each morning, as mist-whooping crept once more through alleys and across bridges, men glanced over their shoulders, wondering what might hide behind the grey. Fog became a symbol, not of danger, but of the delicate line between presence and absence. Just as a fortune can vanish without sound, so too can certainty. What is held too tightly invites the quiet hand of loss. In the markets, merchants whispered stories of other vanishings, of cargoes gone missing upon misted docks, of purses lightened without a touch, of ledgers whose sums turned to dust. Perhaps these tales were born of fear, or perhaps they were echoes, ripples from the same unseen act that stole those coins into silence. No culprit was ever named, no confession ever surfaced. The mystery drifted onward, dissolving into time like breath into fog. And yet in every city that wakes beside water, where the dawn comes shrouded and uncertain, the story lingers, a caution carried by the mist. For there is something almost tender in the way the fog conceals. It does not tear or burn, it simply folds the world into softness until the edges fade. And in that gentleness lies its power, the power to make what was once solid seem fleeting, to turn the weight of gold into a whisper. Years later, when new generations walked those streets, the counting house still stood by the river, its walls scrubbed clean, its locks remade, its chests refilled. But those who lingered in early hours claimed they could still hear it, the faint clink of coins long gone, the sigh of air where treasure once lay, the echo of footsteps passing just beyond sight. And so, the tale became part of the city's breath, a reminder that wealth, no matter how heavy, can dissolve like mist, that certainty, no matter how firm, can falter in silence. Beyond the riverbanks, beyond the counting rooms and watchtowers, others listened to the story and learned. They understood that the greatest strength of any fortress lies not in its walls, but in the trust of those who believe it safe. And trust, like fog, is easily parted. The fog would return, as it always did, rolling through the streets with patient grace, touching doorways and windows, cloaking the familiar in mystery. And each time it came, the city would pause, just for a moment, and remember the morning when the chests sighed empty and the coins slipped away into the grey. In that quiet space between night and day, between presence and disappearance, the heist lives on, not as crime alone, but as a whisper of human longing, the eternal desire to hold what cannot be held, to claim what the world insists is untouchable. The fog fades. The sun climbs. Life resumes. But somewhere in the pale breath of dawn, the echo lingers, the sound of coins that vanished with the fog. Morning came softly to Paris, brushing its boulevards with pale gold, stirring curtains and waking shutters. The city, always poised between shadow and splendour, yawned awake beneath the chiming of distant bells. And yet beneath the polished veneer of cafes and carriages, another rhythm pulsed, quiet, deliberate, precise. Here, among marble facades and perfumed salons, theft wore a tailored coat and bowed politely. The age of brute force was fading. In its place rose the age of charm, a new kind of heist, crafted not with daggers and masks, but with waltzes, wit, and whispered lies. In Paris, elegance was a language. Those who mastered it could move unseen through the richest rooms. Their hands never hurried, their eyes always kind. They were not robbers in the common sense. They were illusionists, poets of deception, weaving schemes so intricate they seemed almost like grace. One such man, remembered only in scattered police reports and trembling testimonies, was said to stroll the arcades at dusk with a silver-tipped cane and gloves of finest suede. His name, if it ever was real, changed with each season. Henri, Lucien, perhaps Auguste, though all who met him agreed. He smiled like someone who already owned the world. He preferred soirees, where chandeliers burned with soft light and laughter rippled like silk. There, he found his stage. The glittering assemblies of bankers, diplomats, and heiresses. A compliment here, a shared glance there, and soon a diamond clasp would loosen itself, as if enchanted by his voice. Rings slipped away like sighs, pocket watches vanished mid-toast. Yet none would notice, not until morning, when the spell broke and the absence felt heavier than gold. But these gentlemen thieves, for there were several, each with their own circle of grace, were not driven by greed alone. They saw the world as a game of appearances, where wealth was theatre, and illusion the only truth. To them, each heist was a performance, every theft a stanza in a poem written against the vanity of the age. Paris itself conspired to help them. The city's narrow streets, its shifting fogs and mirrored windows, blurred pursuit and memory alike. Policemen, though diligent, often arrived too late, discovering footprints that led nowhere, names that dissolved like perfume. There were tales whispered in cafes of daring feats, a necklace lifted from an opera box mid-performance, its owner so entranced by the music she felt no touch. A vault opened not by force, but by invitation. The thief posing as a visiting count, welcomed by those he meant to rob. And always the mark of the gentleman was the same: precision, silence, and a note, sometimes a line of verse, sometimes a pressed flower, left behind not as mockery, but as art. Beauty, one such message read, is not in possession, but in the fleeting. For years, Paris hummed with their quiet legend. Detectives walked with eyes half dreaming, half dreading, unsure whether to chase or to admire. Society too played its part, lamenting the losses, yet secretly thrilled by the audacity, the grace of crimes that never broke a window, never drew blood. Some said they gathered at twilight in a hidden salon off Rue Saint-Honoré, a room lined with mirrors and maps. There they shared wine, traded stories, and planned their next enchantment, one last waltz before the century turned. Others claimed they were no men at all, but the spirit of the city itself, the echo of its restless charm, stealing not for want, but for the pleasure of being unseen. Yet time, ever patient, folds even elegance into dust. The age of the gentleman waned as locks grew cleverer, police more cunning, and wealth more guarded. Electric light flooded the salons, burning away the soft shadows where illusions once danced. The thieves faded, their names swallowed by rumour, their treasures scattered across pawnshops and collections that would never know their origin. Still, their touch lingers. In every city where the glitter of wealth blinds and the theatre of status masks the fragile heart beneath, their spirit drifts, a whisper in silk halls, a reflection in glass too fleeting to trace. For they understood something the world has never quite forgotten, that the boundary between possession and illusion is thin, that beauty often hides in transience, and that the most graceful hands are those that leave nothing behind but wonder. Paris moved on, the boulevards filled with new voices, new ambitions, new forms of hunger. But sometimes, in the quiet hour before dawn, when the gaslights flicker and the Seine breathes fog across its bridges, one might catch a glimmer, a faint echo of polished boots on stone, a shadow that pauses at a balcony, a figure tipping his hat to no one in particular before vanishing into the mist. And perhaps, in that fleeting glimpse, lies the truth the city still carries, that the most perfect heists are those we do not notice until they are long complete, when the laughter fades, the light softens, and the heart stirs with a strange, wistful ache for something it cannot name. For in the end, what the gentleman thieves stole was never merely gold or jewels. They took certainty, that fragile faith in what we think we own. They left behind, instead, a lesson whispered in the hush between footsteps, that all things gleam only for a moment, and that even the brightest treasure belongs for a time to the fog. There are places in the world where walls remember more than people do, where stone corridors breathe with secrets long folded into their mortar. Beneath the hum of cities and the ringing of bells, there are lines invisible to the eye, paths drawn not in ink, but in silence. In the age when Paris still glimmered with chandeliers and whispered conspiracies, a quieter kind of thief emerged, not one who slipped through salons or courtyards, but one who listened. He carried no dagger, wore no mask. Instead, he moved with the patience of a scholar, tracing forgotten blueprints and collecting the murmurs of caretakers, archivists, and night watchmen. He sought not jewels or gold, but doors, and the maps that revealed where they waited. The city was full of them, heavy, ornate portals that sealed vaults, cellars, and counting rooms. Some stood behind painted panels in merchant halls, others beneath trapdoors where no candle burned. They guarded fortunes, archives, relics, and the dreams of kings, but no door, no matter how mighty, could remain truly silent. Each spoke in its own way, in hinges that sighed, in keyholes shaped like stars, in the faint scent of oil where a hand had lingered too often. The man, whose name has long since faded, began to weave these whispers together. By day, he walked among scholars and clerks, asking idle questions about construction and design. By night, he bent over parchments and sketches, tracing lines from cellar to street, from stairwell to hidden alcove. Slowly, he built a new kind of map, not of rivers or roads, but of locks. Each mark upon the parchment was a boundary between trust and vulnerability. And as the map grew, it revealed the truth that no fortress stands alone. Beneath the surface, everything connects. Tunnels, ducts, service corridors, forgotten gates, once meant for servants or soldiers. He began to test his work. A vault beneath a merchant's house yielded first, not through its door, which was bound with iron, but through a coal chute sealed in haste generations ago. Another gave way by means of an old aqueduct, dry now, its entrance hidden beneath ivy and moss. He never pried nor broke. He simply stepped where others no longer looked. The locks remained untouched, but their purpose faded before his knowledge. Soon, whispers spread of a phantom who moved unseen, who could walk into chambers sealed for centuries and vanish again without trace. His thefts were measured not in weight, but in understanding, the quiet proof that every lock holds its own undoing. Some say he sold his discoveries to princes and bankers, drawing for them maps of their own weakness, warning them of how easily their treasures could dissolve into shadow. Others claimed he used his knowledge only once, for a single, perfect heist, after which he vanished into the labyrinth he had charted. Whatever truth lies buried, the idea he left behind endures, that the world itself is a puzzle of barriers and openings, and that the clever do not force their way. They listen, they wait, they trace the spaces between. In time, those who followed him became cartographers of silence. They studied not walls, but what walls concealed. The first safecrackers borrowed from his patience, the first infiltrators from his maps. For the greatest heists are not acts of strength, but of understanding. The moment one sees that a locked door is only a question waiting for the right kind of answer. Cities grew taller, vaults heavier, locks more intricate. Yet each design, no matter how cunning, bore within it the faint echo of imperfection, a seam, a joint, a hinge, a flaw. And somewhere, in dusty archives or in the folds of forgotten blueprints, the key always waits, drawn in faint ink by hands that believe themselves secure. Scholars of later ages would pore over these hidden paths as if studying scripture. Some found tunnels beneath banks, others doors sealed and lost beneath layers of construction. A few uncovered empty vaults, rooms where treasure had once lain, removed so precisely that not even the dust seemed disturbed. The man who began it all, the mapmaker of locked doors, left no confession, no ledger of theft. Only fragments remain, a torn corner of parchment, a note in the margin of an engineer's journal, a line whispered in a tavern. The strongest wall is one no one remembers to watch. Perhaps he never stole a thing. Perhaps his heist was knowledge itself, the quiet revelation that every fortress, no matter how proud, is hollowed by its own design. As centuries turn, the idea still lingers. Architects speak of vulnerabilities, locksmiths of tolerances, spies of access routes hidden in plain sight. Yet beneath their calculations lies a single, haunting truth, that the world is full of doors, and each is part of a map no one has fully drawn. Sometimes, when fog settles over an old city and the lamps burn low, one might feel it, the gentle pull of invisible lines, the sense that beneath one's feet, beneath the chatter and the traffic, another world stirs, corridors, tunnels, tower, leading to chambers where silence keeps its watch. It is in those hidden spaces that the spirit of the mapmaker endures, not as a ghost, but as a question, always unfolding. What lies behind the next door? And who, even now, is quietly charting the way inside. Steel rails hum softly beneath the weight of the world. Engines sigh like restless beasts, pulling their burden of letters, parcels, and promises through the grey breath of dawn. In the 19th century, when time itself seemed newly tamed by timetables and whistles, the railway became the heartbeat of progress, steady, reliable, unstoppable. Yet within that rhythmic certainty, a silence waited, patient, deliberate, almost sacred, a silence that would one day swallow a fortune. In the great age of steam, trust travelled in iron boxes. They were built heavy, reinforced with rivets and locks, and sealed with wax and steel. Inside lay wages for soldiers, jewels for noble families, the earnings of distant merchants, all entrusted to the ceaseless rhythm of the train. The carriages that bore them were guarded by conductors with polished boots and watchful eyes. But even vigilance can be lulled by repetition. Station after station, the whistles sang, the wheels clattered, and the strongbox sat quietly, humming with its own metallic secret. One autumn evening, as fog rolled low across the countryside and lamps shimmered like distant stars, a mail train left the depot under a pale crescent moon. Inside, among stacks of ledgers and sacks of correspondence, stood a single iron chest, sealed, certified, and set for delivery at dawn. It would never arrive. No bullet shattered the air. No window broke. The guards swore they saw nothing, heard nothing. The train moved unbroken through the night, its pistons beating like a steady heart. And yet, when the carriage was opened at the next terminal, the chest was gone, vanished as though plucked from the air. At first, disbelief, then confusion, then quiet dread. For how could a thing so heavy, so secure, dissolve into silence while locked within a moving fortress? Investigators arrived before sunrise, their boots echoing along the platform. They examined bolts, seals, hinges. The floor was unscarred, the doors untouched, the windows sealed. Not a rivet out of place. Only a faint trace remained, the ghost of dust where the box had stood, and the chill of absence that lingered in its wake. The railway men swore their faith in routine, every lock double-checked, every latch drawn firm. No stranger had boarded, no signal faltered. And yet, as the sun lifted over the horizon, painting the tracks in pale gold, the truth lay hidden between the rails, that even the most perfect rhythm can be broken by a single note unheard. Weeks passed. Theories bloomed and faded. Some whispered of accomplices hidden within the postal service, men who knew every timetable, every junction, every moment when the world blinked. Others spoke of tunnels dug beneath the line, of secret compartments built within the very carriages, of shadows that moved when no one watched. But those who looked more deeply began to notice something subtler, a flaw in trust itself. For the railway, in its proud precision, had become predictable. Every route, every stop, every turn of the key traced in advance. A melody so familiar that one who listened closely could learn where silence might fall. And so, somewhere between two stations, at the point where fog thickened and lanterns burned dim, a hand perhaps reached through the rhythm, quiet, deliberate, rehearsed, and rewrote the score. The box disappeared, not through force, but through understanding. A door opened when no one thought to look. A key turned at just the right breath, and the weight of the world slipped into the night, swallowed by the mist and the endless miles. The loss became legend. No culprit confessed, no treasure returned. The railway carried on, more vigilant now, more wary of the silence it once trusted. Locks grew heavier, schedules tighter, guards more numerous. But the echo of that vanished chest travelled with every train thereafter, the haunting reminder that motion does not always mean safety, and that silence can conceal the most perfect crime. Travellers who rode the night trains in the years that followed often spoke of a feeling, faint, uneasy, that between the rhythm of the wheels and the sigh of the engine, there was something else. A pause, a breath, a whisper almost too soft to hear. Some said it was the sound of the stolen box, still moving somewhere through the fog, carried forever on invisible rails. Others believed it was the voice of the thief himself, not gloating, not cruel, but patient, reminding the world that even progress has shadows. For every lock, however strong, holds a silence within it. And silence, once understood, is the greatest key of all. Years passed, and the world changed. Steam yielded to steel, ink to wire, coin to code. But in the archives of old railway stations, among the yellowed manifests and fading stamps, the mystery endures. A ledger with a missing entry, a journey that ended incomplete. It is said that those who open those ledgers at dusk can still smell the faint scent of iron and oil, can still feel the cold weight of a vanished promise pressing through the paper. And if one listens closely, in the hush between whistles, in the soft ticking of the station clock, they might hear it again. The silence of the railway strongbox, heavier than gold, lighter than air, perfect in its vanishing. For what was stolen that night was not merely a chest of coins, but the illusion that movement itself could guard what the heart fears to lose. And somewhere, in the endless hum of the rails, the echo lingers, a note of silence, carrying the memory of a heist the world never truly heard. The city of Antwerp has always known how to shine. Its streets, though narrow and cobbled, glimmered with the quiet weight of treasure, the kind that catches light even in darkness. Behind shuttered windows and beneath vaults buried in stone, the heart of the city pulsed with fire. Diamonds, small as teardrops, and older than memory. They arrived from the farthest corners of the earth, wrapped in canvas and whispers. Merchants examined them by candlelight, tilting each one toward the flame to catch the star trapped within. Here, worth was measured, not in crowns or coins, but in the way light broke, a brilliance that could buy silence, loyalty, even history itself. It was this brilliance that once drew the cleverest minds of Europe into Antwerp's narrow veins, men who understood that in a city where every stone sparkled, shadows must hide their own kind of wealth. The vault beneath the diamond district was said to be unbreachable. 30 metres underground, encased in concrete thicker than a man's height, locked by steel doors with no keyholes, guarded by lasers, heat sensors, and the watchful eyes of the city's most cautious minds. Each night, its doors sealed with ritual precision, and above, the city slept, believing that its treasures were safe beneath layers of certainty. But certainty, like light, has a fragile edge. It began with patience. A rented office, modest and unremarkable, across the street from the vault. Days turned into months. Notes were taken not in haste, but in quiet observation. Which guards smiled too easily? Which windows caught the reflection of the cameras? Which wires trembled faintly when the wind shifted? Inside that patient silence, a plan took root, not of force, but of mimicry. If the vault was built to recognize patterns, then one needed only to learn its rhythm and hum it back softly, perfectly, until it mistook intrusion for routine. The men who undertook this heist did not wear masks or wield weapons. They wore gloves of calm precision, hearts tuned to the pulse of calculation. They mapped the hidden veins of the building, the service ducts that carried air, the wires that carried sight, the shadows that carried safety. And one winter night, when the city's lamps flickered against the frost, and the streets fell still beneath their hush of snow, they descended into the earth. No alarms sang, no locks shattered, no footstep faltered. The vault door yielded not through violence but persuasion. Senses dulled by careful mimicry, circuits lulled into false sleep. They stepped inside like guests arriving to a silent ballroom. What they found gleamed like constellations scattered upon the earth. Diamonds by the handful, sealed in velvet, sleeping beneath the cold hum of fluorescent light. Each stone, perfect and ancient, reflected not only the room, but the faces of those who would soon vanish into legend. They worked with reverence. No hurried hands, no careless noise. The vault became a chapel, the heist a ritual, and when they left nothing broken. No alarms triggered, no walls scarred, no trace save for absence itself. By dawn, the vault still stood, proud and silent. It was only when the light fell through the security glass, illuminating rows of empty trays, that the illusion shattered. The guards stood motionless, as though the world had paused. Cameras had seen nothing, locks reported no breach, and yet millions in diamonds had vanished into air. The city buzzed with disbelief. Experts descended with magnifying lenses and theories, measuring, tracing, doubting. But what they found was a ghost signature, a theft so precise it seemed impossible, as though the earth itself had swallowed its own treasure. In cafes and courtrooms, people spoke of it with awe. Some called it the perfect crime, others a work of art, the rare moment when human cunning mirrored the precision of the stones it sought. And yet, perfection rarely endures, for the brilliance of diamonds is both blessing and curse. They burn too brightly to remain unseen. In time, whispers spread across borders of a careless boast, a sudden purchase, a man unable to live as quietly as he had stolen. One by one, fragments surfaced, a stone here, a rumour there, leading investigators not to the vault, but to the human frailty that followed it. For even the most flawless plan must pass through the imperfect hands of those who dream. And in that tremor lies the seed of discovery. The diamonds, many of them, were never found. Some say they rest in the corners of antique rings and hidden drawers, their fire dimmed by secrecy. Others believe they were scattered intentionally, each one a piece of silence paid to buy freedom. But the vault remembers. It stands still in Antwerp, humming softly beneath the city's weight, its lights flickering upon trays now lined with new stones. Yet in its hum there lingers a memory, not of intrusion, but of stillness, of a night when silence learned how to open even the most guarded heart. And above, the city carries on. Merchants weigh brilliance in their palms. Buyers hold their breath as light fractures through crystal. But every now and then, when the lamps dim and the hush returns, someone glances toward the floor and wonders how deep trust truly runs. For every vault is a mirror, and every diamond a reminder, that what we treasure most is also what the world longs most to take. Somewhere, in the hush between heartbeat and thought, the echo of Antwerp's vanished fire still gleams, a constellation unseen, a theft carried out not by violence, but by the quietest understanding of light and shadow. There are places where silence holds its breath a little longer, halls where footsteps once echoed softly against marble, and where paintings hung like portals to worlds that never faded. In such a place, time itself seemed to stand still, a museum asleep beneath the faint hum of lights, its corridors perfumed with dust, oil and memory. On quiet nights, the air felt heavy with centuries, brushstrokes that captured storms, faces that once breathed, fields that bloomed under vanished cons. They were not mere paintings, but anchors, each canvas a fragment of a world that no longer lived except here, in the stillness of frame and varnish. But even beauty, when trapped, calls to those who dream of freedom, or fortune. The city had long trusted its museum as one trusts an old clock, reliable, unchanging, its rhythm steady through generations. Guards patrolled the same paths each evening, cameras blinked their red eyes through the hours, and the walls stood firm, as if history itself were content to rest, undisturbed. And yet, on a night when rain whispered against the roof, and the lamps outside cast trembling reflections on wet cobblestones, the rhythm faltered. A door that should have been sealed was left with the faintest breath of space, a gap no wider than a sigh. Through it, shadows slipped like mist, not hurried, not clumsy, but deliberate, practiced. Their footsteps left no sound, their breaths measured, their hands gloved, not just against detection, but against reverence, as if they too understood the holiness of what they touched. They moved through galleries as if guided by memory, each turn exact, each choice deliberate. They did not pause at every masterpiece. They knew what they came for, what light burned brightest, what name would echo longest. Vermeer's Quiet Girl, pearls glinting like stars. Rembrandt's Storm, frozen mid-fury upon restless seas. Manet's Concert, half dream, half revelation, each canvas lifted with care, each frame left behind like a body bereft of spirit. No alarm screamed, no locks broke, no violence marred the stillness. Only absence remained, and the faint scent of rain carried in on the intruders' coats. By dawn, the city stirred beneath pale light, and the museum awoke as it always did, lights humming to life, doors unlocking, guards stepping into their slow orbit. But in the galleries, something was wrong. The air hung strangely hollow. The walls, once alive with colour, seemed to exhale. And then, the gasp. Frames, heavy, ornate, empty, hooks bare, canvases gone. The museum's silence turned to disbelief, then sorrow. Police came, then journalists, their voices too loud for rooms built for whispers. They spoke of losses measured in millions, but the true wound was quieter. The emptiness where once a gaze had met another across centuries. Days turned to weeks, and the stolen works slipped into myth. The world searched, but art, once free of walls, becomes ghostly. It vanishes into hidden vaults, private collections, or perhaps burns unseen to erase a trail too costly to follow. And in the city, the museum remained, its frames still hanging, bare and aching. Not replaced, not forgotten. A memorial to the night beauty disappeared. Visitors came to stand before them, not to see, but to remember seeing. They gazed at emptiness, and found in it a reflection of all things fragile, that what we cherish most can be taken without a sound. Investigators pieced together the fragments. A false alarm, a silent motion detector disabled in the dark, a door opened by a key never reported missing, faces blurred on old tapes, a van unseen by witnesses. And then, nothing. A thread unspooling into shadow. Years passed. Rumours surfaced. A painting glimpsed in an attic in Spain. A whisper in a bar in Venice. A collector's boast overheard in Rio. Each lead faded, like light retreating down a corridor that has no end. But the mystery endured. and with it, a kind of reverence. For there was beauty even in the theft, not in the crime itself, but in the precision, the stillness, the knowledge that something so priceless could vanish so completely. And the museum, with its hollow frames, became a monument not only to art, but to absence, a lesson carved in silence. Visitors still walk its halls at dusk. They stop before the empty frames, and stare not at what is gone, but at what remains. The echo of brushstrokes, the ghost of colour, the whisper of the hand that painted, and the hand that took. And in that stillness, as lamplight pools across polished floors, the city outside breathes its evening sigh, and the museum listens. For somewhere, out in the world, perhaps behind a hidden door, or beneath a foreign sky, the stolen paintings wait, their colours still alive, their stories unfinished. And perhaps, on some quiet night, when the rain returns, and the walls once more hold their breath, they will find their way home. Until then, the frames remain, not empty, but patient, holding not canvas, but memory. And within that memory, the faint shimmer of a truth too delicate to catch. That beauty, though it may vanish, never truly disappears. There are moments in history when truth drifts like smoke, visible for a breath, then gone, leaving only the scent of something burned, something stolen, something never meant to be seen again. As the world moved on from the vanished paintings, another stage was being set, not in quiet halls of marble and frames, but in the humming heart of a city where money slept behind steel, and men believed in the certainty of locks. It was an age of routine and trust, of polished floors and ticking clocks, of clerks who greeted each morning with the same tired nod, never wondering if the vault beneath their feet might one day wake to emptiness. The bank itself stood like a monument to confidence, its facade carved with columns and lions, its walls thick enough to hold both wealth and the illusion of safety. No one questioned the silence of its basement corridors, nor the hum of the machines that sealed the vaults each night. For smoke, when it moves slowly, looks like mist. An illusion, when perfect, feels like truth. The plan began, as all great deceptions do, with observation. A man walking past the same door each day, counting steps, listening for rhythms, noting when lights dimmed, when guards changed, when trust grew lazy. He was no common thief. To some, he was a craftsman, to others a magician. His tools were not brute force, but patience, precision and disguise. He became what the building expected to see: a cleaner with rolled sleeves and a tired back, a repairman adjusting a fixture, a courier carrying ledgers wrapped in string. Each mask worn lightly, each movement rehearsed until it left no ripple. Bit by bit, he built a map, not on paper, but in memory, a labyrinth of hallways, a symphony of locks and hinges, a dance of shadows and schedules. And then, one night, when the city slept beneath a soft veil of fog, the illusion took shape. Smoke drifted through vents, not fire, but a mimicry of it, crafted from harmless powders and hidden burners. It rolled through corridors like a sigh, triggering alarms that whispered of danger, but never screamed. Guards moved swiftly, doors unlocked, corridors cleared, as the magician's smoke drew their eyes upward, away from the quiet figure below, slipping through the unguarded vault door. Inside, time seemed to pause. Steel drawers gleamed under dim light, each one a promise of wealth, each one trusting its lock to hold against the world. But locks, like men, are vulnerable to understanding. His hands moved with calm certainty, turns, clicks, whispers of tumblers aligning like stars in a secret constellation. No violence, no rush, only the slow unravelling of a machine built on faith. One by one, the drawers yielded. Stacks of notes, gold coins, bonds folded like sleeping birds. Treasures not earned, but waiting, patient and unguarded. He worked in silence, guided by an invisible clock that measured not hours, but breaths. When the smoke above cleared, and the guards returned, the vault stood exactly as they had left it. No broken hinges, no shattered glass, no mark of intrusion. Only the faintest shift, a drawer a millimetre ajar, a shadow where paper once lay. The theft was not discovered that night, nor the next. It revealed itself slowly, like a trick explained too late. By the time the loss was tallied, the magician was gone, his disguises folded, his path erased, his face forgotten in the blur of routine. Whispers spread, of smoke in the vents, of keys that fit too well, of a thief who took not what he could carry, but only what would not be missed until morning. The newspapers called it a phantom heist. The investigators found no fingerprints, no footprints, no clue beyond the question of how a man could vanish while standing in plain sight. And yet, those who studied the theft saw something more, a reflection of the world itself, where trust was smoke, and disguise the air we breathed. For in every city, behind every locked door, there is a faith that what is hidden will remain so. But faith is fragile. An illusion, when perfected, becomes indistinguishable from reality. In time, the vault was sealed again, its locks replaced, its alarms sharpened. New guards walked its halls, their eyes alert, their hearts wary. But in the quiet hours before dawn, when fog brushed against the windows, and the hum of the city softened to a hush, some swore they could still smell the faint trace of smoke, a whisper from the night when shadows wore uniforms, and gold disappeared without a sound. The legend of the smoke thief endured, not for the fortune he took, but for the grace with which he vanished. He did not chase fame, nor leave taunts behind. He sought only the perfection of the act, a heist so gentle, so precise, that it became art. And so, history filed his name not under crime, but under wonder, a ghost among vaults, a craftsman of deception, a reminder that what we hold most secure is often what we understand least. And beyond the vault, beyond the smoke, the world turned, cities waking, clocks ticking, and in some hidden place, a man breathing quietly, surrounded by the silence of treasures that once believed they could never be touched. There are moments when the earth no longer feels sufficient for human daring, when stone walls and steel vaults no longer satisfy the restless heart that seeks the impossible. And so, the gaze turns upward, to clouds that carry no locks, to horizons that leave no footprints. By the mid-century, the world had grown smaller. Trains no longer defined distance. Ships no longer carried the secrets of empires alone. The sky belonged to men now, and in its endless expanse, they saw not only freedom, but opportunity. Airports became the new cathedrals of commerce, where suitcases whispered of fortunes, and runways gleamed under watchful lights. In their bustle, 1,000 transactions unfolded each hour, each sealed with paper, metal, and trust. Gold was no longer moved by ship or carriage, but by planes that crossed oceans in a single night, faster than suspicion, faster than fear, and somewhere between departure and arrival, in the thin air where nations blurred, a handful of men saw what others missed. A vault not bound by walls, but carried on wings. The plan began in whispers, among those who knew the rhythms of flight, the cargo manifests, the weight of each crate, the moments when vigilance softened between loading and liftoff. No smoke this time, no tunnels or silent locks. Only patience and the precision of a mind that could map the movements of a skyborne fortune. It was not the gold itself they sought, but the space between certainty and oversight. The moment when the plane's doors sealed and the ground crew turned away, trusting in the air to guard what the earth no longer could. Under the cover of routine, they approached the tarmac like ghosts. Uniforms borrowed, badges forged with quiet care, steps measured so perfectly that even the watchful eyes of security saw only what they expected. In the belly of the aircraft, beneath the echo of engines idling low, they found the crate, marked with simple codes, ordinary to the untrained eye, yet carrying a fortune in bars too heavy to lift alone. And yet, they did not need to carry it far. For another crate waited beside it, identical in size and weight, filled not with treasure, but sand. The simplest of disguises, hidden beneath the hum of machinery and trust. The exchange took minutes, the theft itself less than a heartbeat. No alarms, no struggle, only the quiet thud of wood sliding into place. By dawn, the plane rose into the sky, its engines roaring like a hymn, carrying with it the illusion of safety. The sand crossed oceans, while the gold remained behind, rolled away into the mist, loaded into a van that blended with the waking city. The newspapers would call it impossible, a theft too graceful to believe, a riddle written in clouds. Investigators searched every hangar, every manifest, every name etched in the logs. But the air leaves no fingerprints. The wind qui posnol menmeri. And the gold? It vanished into silence, melted, perhaps, reshaped into coins or crowns, its identity erased like footprints in shifting sand. Those who planned it moved quietly thereafter, their lives unchanged on the surface. A mechanic still at work, a clerk still filling forms, a man still boarding flights with an expression too calm to suspect. But at night, perhaps, they looked upward, to skies they had once stolen from, to the thin line between clouds and dreams, and smiled at the thought that the greatest vault in the world was never built of stone, but of trust. The story passed into legend, told in low voices in airport bars, among pilots and loaders who spoke of a ghostly crew that rewrote the laws of gravity. And in time, the world grew wiser, locks grew stronger, surveillance sharper, fortunes no longer travelled unguarded through the air. But still, when a plane lifts from the runway at night, its cargo sealed beneath layers of steel and expectation, there lingers a whisper that the sky once betrayed its keepers and carried away a secret it never returned. For in every age, human hands reach for what is forbidden, and the air itself, as boundless as ambition, offers both escape and concealment. And so, the story of the Skyborne Heist lives on, a tale not only of theft, but of the fragile faith we place in flight, and the quiet truth that what rises can vanish as swiftly as the wind. The gold is gone, but the lesson remains, that even the heavens, with all their height and promise, can become an accomplice to those who understand the silence between clouds. And beneath those same skies, on distant runways and forgotten airstrips, the ghosts of that daring night still linger, footsteps fading into the hum of engines, hands brushing against the cool skin of a plane, and eyes that saw the world from above and knew that even the sky could be stolen. Beneath every city, there are shadows older than its streets, pipes that hum with forgotten water, wires that carry the murmurs of a restless age, and tunnels where the air smells of stone and time. In the south of France, where sunlight drapes itself across pale walls and the sea sings softly against the shore, The city of Nice slept in a rhythm of waves and bells. Its people rose with the dawn, its markets filled with the scent of bread and salt, and beneath it all, the earth listened. For years, a man walked those streets with eyes that lingered not on the horizon, but on the ground beneath his feet. He was quiet, unremarkable, a craftsman by trade, a mason, a dreamer, a man who saw the bones beneath the city's skin. To others, the bank that stood near the Place Massena was a monument of marble and confidence, its vaults a fortress sunk deep into bedrock. To him, it was a puzzle, a treasure sealed not by faith, but by stone, and stone could be persuaded. He listened to the city as others listened to music. He learned the way footsteps echoed in alleyways, how the sound changed near the old sewers, how the walls grew hollow where the earth had been carved long ago by hands now turned to dust. Slowly, a plan formed, not of speed or violence, but of patience, a whisper answered by stone. Night after night, he descended into the forgotten tunnels, lamp flickering against damp walls, marking the path with chalk and memory. Each turn led deeper into silence, until even the city's heartbeat faded. There, in the earth's stillness, he began his work. Pick by pick, shovel by shovel, stone gave way to space. He tunneled not with greed, but with reverence, as though he were carving a passage not to wealth, but to understanding. Days passed above in sunlight and chatter, while below, the tunnel stretched, a narrow vein running toward the vault that slumbered like a buried star. He measured by instinct, counting steps, feeling vibrations, listening for the deep, dull echo that told him he was near. And when at last his hand brushed the cold metal of the vault's underside, he smiled in the darkness. The earth, patient and quiet, had delivered him. He waited for the weekend, a long holiday when the bank would rest, its halls empty, its silence unbroken. Then with a final push, he breached the floor. A small hole opened like a secret, and through it he climbed into the vault. No alarms, no guards, no eyes. The room was still, the air heavy with the scent of locked gold. Boxes lined the walls, each one a chapter of someone's fortune. Rings, coins, watches, heirlooms gathered over lifetimes and sealed away in faith. He worked calmly, opening what he could, leaving what resisted. There was no rush. The world above would not stir for days. He and his companions, fellow craftsmen of shadow, sat together in the vault, eating bread, drinking wine, laughing softly as though in a chapel. It was not chaos, but ritual, a communion between man and stone. When they left, they sealed the path behind them, erasing their steps as if they had never walked there. Only the echo remained, the faint hum of air moving through a tunnel that led to nowhere. When the bank reopened, the clerks descended into the vault as always, their keys jingling like tiny bells. But what they found was a dream undone. Hundreds of boxes pried open, jewels gone, paper torn, dust disturbed. No door had been forced, no lock broken, only a hole in the floor, a mouth where the earth had spoken. The newspapers called it the heist of the century, a robbery without violence, a fortune stolen with the patience of time itself. The thieves had taken what they could carry, and left behind a message scrawled in chalk on the wall. Without weapons, without hate, without violence. A phrase both confession and prayer, a reminder that this was not merely theft, but art. The city above trembled with fascination. How had men breached a fortress, not with force, but with faith in silence? And more haunting still, where had they gone? The tunnels were searched, their paths traced and sealed, but the echoes lingered, a whisper beneath the cobblestones that reminded every passerby that the ground below remembered more than it revealed. In time, some were caught, their names whispered in courtrooms, their eyes calm, their hands calloused by earth. They spoke not of greed, but of the beauty in the plan, a perfect conversation between man and matter. And long after their voices faded, the tunnels remained, veins of shadow running beneath the city, humming softly in the dark. Some say that at night, if one stands near the old bank and listens closely, a faint rhythm can be heard, the sound of picks on stone, of breath in silence, of a dream carved into the bones of the earth. It is the echo of a heist, born not of chaos, but of patience, a theft that asked permission from the walls, and left behind not ruin, but wonder. For the earth holds secrets kindly, and the tunnels beneath Nice still whisper of the night when fortune itself was touched by hands that knew the language of silence. The earth beneath Nice had whispered its secrets, and when silence closed behind the last echo of those tunnels, the world above kept turning, steady, unaware, as though the ground had never been hollowed by human hands. But theft is not always born from shadowed corridors and picks against stone. Sometimes it comes softly, without footprints, without faces, without even the sound of a door opening. There are heists not of gold or jewels, but of numbers, of promises written in ledgers, and fortunes woven from the fragile thread of trust. In the quiet dawn of the 20th century, the great banks of the world were no longer vaults of stone and steel alone. They had become dream factories, places where wealth was no longer touched, but imagined, counted in symbols that danced across paper. And one day, a bank woke to find that its fortune had vanished, not stolen in the night, but dissolved in the daylight, like ink washed from a page. It began, as such things often do, with confidence. In the heart of a city where men wore belief like a suit, stood a building of marble and mirrors, a monument to precision and pride. Behind its tall windows, clerks moved with ritual grace, their pens scratching the same hymns across endless books, recording sums that rose and fell like tides. The vaults below hummed with quiet order, rows of boxes sealed, coins stacked in obedient towers, bills crisp and folded like prayers. To the customers, the bank was eternal. They brought their savings, their wages, their dowries, and placed them in its care as one might lay an offering before an altar. The promise was simple: your fortune will wait for you. But promises, like paper, burn easily. It began with small errors, a missing signature here, a ledger that did not balance there. A clerk, young and weary, noticed numbers that seemed to shift when no one was watching. A sum recorded twice, an account too large, a transfer that no one recalled making. Yet the days were long, and the pace of business relentless. The numbers blurred, and the murmurs were dismissed, mere dust in the machine. But dust gathers. And one morning, when the ledgers were opened to reconcile the accounts, there was a silence in the room that no one could explain. Rows of numbers stared back, empty, weightless, their meaning gone. The fortune, the gold, the securities, the investments, existed only on paper, and now the paper lied. The vault still stood, the doors still gleamed, but the wealth it was meant to guard had evaporated into thin air, replaced by ink, confusion, and the slow, dreadful understanding that belief itself had been the only treasure. The clerks whispered to one another, their hands trembling as they turned page after page. Every calculation seemed to lead nowhere, a loop of promises feeding upon itself. The manager, pale and wordless, descended into the vault as if expecting to find the truth waiting in the dark. He found coins, yes, but far fewer than the ledgers claimed. Stacks of notes, but each one already pledged, borrowed, relent, a web of obligations too tangled to name. Somewhere in the labyrinth of accounts, a hand had moved quietly, transferring sums from one page to another, spinning wealth from illusion, weaving a tapestry so intricate that no one noticed the emptiness growing beneath it. When the truth surfaced, the city trembled. Depositors gathered in anxious crowds, clutching passbooks like lifelines. They demanded their savings, and the tellers could only offer hollow reassurances. Behind the counters, drawers stood nearly bare. The great bank, with all its marble and mirrors, had forgotten its fortune, not because it was stolen in the night, but because it had been built upon faith, and faith had slipped through its fingers. Investigators arrived with briefcases and solemn faces. They spoke of missing assets, of loans that never existed, of clever hands that moved unseen through the labyrinth. Some whispered the name of a single man, a quiet accountant, a trusted servant of numbers who had conjured wealth where there was none, siphoning streams into rivers that led only to himself. Others said it was not one man at all, but a system too vast to understand, a tower built upon promises stacked too high, collapsing under their own weight. In the end, there were no gunshots, no carriages fleeing into the night, no jewels glittering in the dark, only papers fluttering across polished floors, and the echo of a question that lingered long after the doors closed. What is a fortune, if not a belief? The city moved on, as cities do. Another bank rose in the same place, its walls thicker, its locks stronger, its clerks trained to measure twice. But beneath the marble, beneath the ledgers and the polished brass, the memory remained, a lesson written not in ink, but in silence, that the greatest heists need not touch a single coin. They need only whisper to our faith, and let us build our own illusions, brick by fragile brick. Some say the man behind the vanishing was caught years later, living quietly in a villa far from the city, surrounded not by gold, but by books, ledgers of his own making, filled with numbers that led nowhere. Others claim he vanished as completely as the fortune itself, a ghost born from arithmetic, leaving only questions behind. But the story lingers, like the faint hum of a safe long emptied. It is a reminder that not all thieves come in the night. Some wear suits, some carry pens, and some, with nothing but the gentle touch of trust, can make an empire's wealth simply forget to exist. In a world where fortunes vanish without sound, where gold dissolves into ledgers and trust fades like smoke, there remains another kind of theft, one so quiet, so patient, it hides not in darkness, but in light. Some treasures are not buried deep. They rest on pedestals, beneath chandeliers and the gaze of guards, believed to be beyond the reach of mortal hands. But the brightest jewels, the ones that gleam in halls of marble and ceremony, are often the easiest to forget, for who suspects what they see every day? The story begins not in secrecy, but in splendour. A palace of echoing halls, where footsteps glide across polished floors and sunlight filters through stained glass, catching on the gold threads of banners and the cool shimmer of silver crowns. Here, history itself is displayed. Relics of kings and queens, symbols of power meant to remind all who enter that authority is eternal, unshakable, woven into the very fabric of the nation. But eternity is fragile, and symbols, like locks, can be opened. In the heart of such a hall, a crown rested beneath glass, a circle of gold born from centuries, set with stones that had seen the rise and fall of empires. To the visitors who passed by, it was an object of wonder. To the guards, a duty. To the city, a memory. And to one man, it was an equation. He was not a thief by birth, nor by hunger. He was a watchmaker, a student of precision, a poet of mechanisms. His days were filled with the ticking of gears, the rhythm of time measured in fragments. But time, temps pour pierre, was more than a craft. It was a whisper of opportunity. He visited the hall often, not as a criminal, but as a pilgrim. He walked its corridors slowly, watching how the light changed through the hours, how the guards shifted, how eyes lingered and moved on. He noticed the smallest details, the sound of the door hinges, the pattern of steps on marble, the way glass reflected not just light, but shadow. And then one day, as bells rang across the city, he saw what others had not: a flaw. Not in the crown, but in the rhythm of its watchers. A pause between shifts. A moment where attention drifted like a leaf on a current. It was enough for a man who had spent his life studying the space between seconds. He began to design not a theft, but a substitution. For the crown could not vanish. Its absence would scream. But a copy, crafted with patience and reverence, could stand in its place, and no one would know. He spent months in silence, working in a dim workshop lit by the pulse of his own clock. Gold dust glimmered on his fingers, rubies caught the faintest glint of candlelight. He measured every curve, studied every engraving, until his creation was not imitation, but echo. When at last it was finished, he held the twin crowns side by side, and could not tell which sang with history and which with craft. The exchange came not under cover of night, but beneath the hush of day. A festival drew crowds to the palace, and the hall swelled with bodies and music. Guards were doubled, eyes everywhere, and yet in the swell of sound and motion, attention scattered like dust. The watchmaker stepped through the doors with the grace of one who belonged. No disguise, no cloak, only calm. He moved among the visitors, lingering where the light was brightest, and as laughter echoed, as trumpets sounded, he reached the pedestal. His hands moved with reverence, as though adjusting a clock's delicate balance. Glass lifted, breath held, and in a heartbeat so still it seemed the world paused. The true crown slipped into the folds of his coat, and its twin took its throne. He closed the glass gently and stepped back. No alarm, no sound, only the continuation of the festival, the music, the pageantry. The world carried on, and the crown gleamed on in its place, a perfect lie hidden in plain sight. Days became weeks, weeks turned to months. The display remained untouched, admired, praised, photographed by countless visitors. None saw the difference. Even the curators, in their evening rounds, felt the same quiet pride as always. The watchmaker vanished from the city soon after, drifting toward the countryside, where time slowed and the days folded softly upon themselves. He kept the crown not as treasure, but as a companion, a relic not of power, but of patience. Sometimes he would polish it gently, listening to the silence it carried, the centuries locked within its gold. It was years before the truth surfaced. A restoration was planned, an inventory, a cleaning. When the glass lifted again, and the crown was brought into the light, the jeweller's eye caught something the rest had missed. A mark too sharp, a curve too new. By then, the true crown had travelled far beyond reach. Some said it was melted down, its history dissolved into shapelessness. Others whispered that it still rested in a quiet room, guarded not by alarms, but by love. The hall remained open, its pedestal still gleaming. The imitation still sits beneath the glass, and visitors still marvel, unaware that they stand not before a relic, but a story. For sometimes the greatest heists are not those that steal objects, but those that steal meaning. A crown, a symbol, its weight unchanged, yet hollowed, its glory stolen in plain sight. And so the world turns, and we pass through halls of gold and glass, believing what we see, never wondering what truths have been quietly replaced, what treasures hum beneath the surface, waiting for eyes that truly look. There are moments in history when the air itself seems to pause, when clocks hesitate between ticks, and in that fragile breath, the world's certainties are quietly rearranged. In the middle of winter, in a city gripped by snow and soot, the night carried a silence so thick that even the wind seemed unwilling to disturb it. Factories dozed behind their shutters, street lamps burned with tired halos, and the cobblestones gleamed with frost. It was here, in this stillness, that fortune changed hands, not through force, but through patience. The place was unremarkable, a warehouse on a narrow street, its windows barred, its doors thick as ship hulls. Inside, under dim bulbs and the scent of oil and steel, rested the treasure of many men, money collected from banks and businesses, bundled and stacked in quiet trust. This was the counting house of the Brinks Company, a fortress of cash, watched over by locks, alarms, and a faith in walls. But walls, as history has whispered again and again, are only as strong as those who believe in them. The plan began years before the first step was taken. It grew in the corners of taverns, in whispered conversations between men who had grown tired of empty pockets and hard winters. They were not dreamers, nor killers, just labourers, drivers, mechanics, each one carrying a quiet hunger for a life less cold. They studied the rhythm of the warehouse as though it were a clock. They learned when guards arrived, when they left, when keys turned, when no one watched. Patience became their ally. Night after night, they stood in the shadows, counting footsteps, measuring minutes. They never rushed. They let time build trust. In the streets, in the locks, in the illusion that nothing could be touched. And then, on a January evening, the world grew still enough for the impossible to happen. A door opened, not broken, not forced, just turned by hands that knew its weight. Men stepped into the warehouse, faces hidden behind dark cloth, their breath rising in clouds. They carried no guns, only confidence and silence. The guards inside looked up, saw eyes that gave no threat, and were bound gently, their mouths covered not with cruelty, but necessity. The robbers spoke little. They worked as one, moving with the grace of men rehearsed by time. Bundles of bills were lifted, sacks filled until they swelled with quiet promise. $2 million, a mountain of paper and belief, disappeared into the cold night. It took only minutes, and when the last bag was carried out, the lights flickered softly, as if the building itself exhaled. The men vanished into the maze of streets, their footsteps muffled by snow, no gunshots, no alarms, no shouts, just silence, a silence that stretched until dawn. When morning came, the city awoke as it always did, factories whirring, carriages rattling across the stones. But inside the Brinks warehouse, the air was different. The vaults yawned open, and the guards, trembling with disbelief, stared at the emptiness that had replaced fortune. News spread like frost over glass. Headlines shouted of the century's boldest theft, Men in dark coats searched every alley, every tavern, every whisper. But the robbers had dissolved, leaving behind no fingerprints, no names, only the echo of a door closing softly behind them. For years the mystery lingered. The world imagined phantoms, a brotherhood of invisible thieves, masters of shadows. But in truth, they were ordinary men, bound by trust and need, their brilliance born not from cunning, but from restraint. They hid their fortune not in vaults, but in silence. No lavish spending, no sudden wealth. Just the slow, careful living of men who knew that the greatest treasure is time. Time unbound by labour. Time free from want. But silence, like snow, eventually melts. Years passed. The men aged. Friendships frayed. Whispers grew heavy. And one by one, the cracks began to show. When the first confession surfaced, it was spoken not with pride, but weariness. A life lived in hiding is a life half-lived. The weight of the millions had turned from freedom to burden. The arrests came quietly. Men led from small houses, their faces lined with the years between crime and capture. Some of the money was found, but much of it had vanished. Spent in fragments, lost to time, woven into the fabric of ordinary days. And when the last of them stood before the court, the world saw not villains, but men who had once believed they could outwit the ticking of the clock. The Brinks millions had disappeared, not into legend, but into the slow erosion of memory. What remained was a lesson, etched softly into history's glass, that even the boldest heist, the most perfect silence, cannot escape the steady hand of time. The warehouse still stands, its locks replaced, its walls repainted, its name remembered in half-sleeping whispers. And on winter nights, when the air is still and the city holds its breath, some say you can feel it. The faint echo of boots on stone, the hush of men moving in harmony, the moment when fortune changed hands without a sound. In the end, the vanishing of the Brinks millions was not just a theft of money, but a theft of certainty. A reminder that even the safest vaults are only as strong as the quiet patients waiting beyond their doors. There are moments when the earth seems to hum with buried secrets, when the air carries whispers too faint to name, and the dust beneath our feet remembers things that men have long tried to forget. It was in the uneasy hush after war, when nations were counting what remained, that gold became more than metal. It became memory, hope, a fragile promise of rebuilding. Bars of it lay in vaults across the continent, stacked like silent bricks of sunlight, waiting to be moved, guarded, hidden from the chaos that still lingered in the corners of Europe. In one such place, tucked between hills veined with tunnels, lay a reserve whose location was known to only a few. It was watched by soldiers who carried their orders like scripture, to guard what glittered, to let no one near, to trust no soul beyond the gate. And yet, when the sun rose one pale morning, the vault yawned open to emptiness. The gold was gone, every bar, every ounce, as though the earth itself had swallowed it whole. No alarms had sounded. No locks were broken. No guards had vanished from their posts. It was as if the treasure had been lifted by hands made of air. The city awoke to confusion, to headlines written in disbelief. Officials scoured the countryside, questioned every traveller, every whisper. But the silence held fast. There were no footprints, no broken wheels, no tracks cut into the mud. Only the echo of absence, the faint scent of oil and dust where fortune had once gleamed. The investigators called it impossible, but impossibility, as history often proves, is only a word for what has yet to be explained. Rumours began to rise like smoke through chimneys. Some spoke of an inside hand, a careful mind with keys to unseen doors. Others whispered of soldiers who vanished at dawn, their uniforms traded for anonymity. And a few, the quiet, watchful few, spoke of tunnels beneath the hills, old mines sealed and forgotten, where shadows moved like memory, and men became ghosts in the earth. The truth, if one could trace it, began not in the vault, but in the barracks. In the long, dull nights where men kept watch over gold they would never touch. Pay was meagre, rations thin, and the promise of home grew fainter with every sleepless shift. And among them were a handful who had once been miners, who knew the earth's hidden veins, who could read the soil like scripture. They saw the gold as a relic of greed, locked away while families starved. They spoke little, but their silence was not emptiness. It was planning, growing slowly in the dark, like roots beneath frost. They worked in secrecy, night after night, digging from the old mine toward the vault, measuring the ground with the patience of centuries. The earth gave no protest, only the faint sigh of shifting stone. When the tunnel reached the vault, they moved with reverence, not haste. Each bar was lifted quietly, wrapped in cloth, lowered into the throat of the earth where no sound could follow. They left the locks unbroken, the doors untouched, so that by morning the world would awaken to a mystery that felt supernatural. The gold was carried through the dark to an opening far from the guard's eyes, where carts waited beneath the stars. No torch, no lantern, only the pale glimmer of frost on silent wheels. By dawn, they had vanished into the folds of countryside, their path washed clean by rain. The vault stood hollow, its silence vast and unforgiving. When the truth began to surface years later, it did not come as confession, but as fragments. A note found in an old jacket, a map tucked behind a rotting beam, a rumour from a dying man who spoke of lightless tunnels and heavy carts. No fortune was ever recovered. The gold was said to have been melted, reshaped, scattered across borders, woven into economies, into rings, into time itself. The men who took it lived quietly, their names dissolving into history's dust. No legends were carved for them, no songs sung, only the faint suggestion that they had once passed among us. Shadows wearing human faces. Ghosts who took the gold not out of greed, but out of some weary understanding that the world had already stolen enough from them. And so, the story remains: a theft without violence, a vanishing without trace, a haunting reminder that sometimes the boldest acts are those committed in perfect silence. The hills above the old vault are quiet now. Grass grows where tunnels once breathed, and the stones hold their secrets close. On still nights, when fog curls low and the air smells faintly of rust and earth, locals say you can hear the faint scrape of shovels, the soft murmur of voices deep underground, ghosts at work, carrying a fortune through the dark. Perhaps it is only the wind, or perhaps the earth, faithful to memory, refuses to let the story end. Because in the hush between what was lost and what was never found, the gold still gleams, unseen, untouched, and waiting for no one. There comes a moment, after too many vanishings, too many fortunes that dissolved into silence, when the world grows tired of being fooled, and in that weariness, it begins to build walls, not just of stone and iron, but of fear, and the quiet resolve to never again wake to emptiness. It was an age when cities were learning to breathe again, when nations stitched their wounds with steel and commerce. Banks rose like temples, their vaults hidden beneath streets lined with gas lamps, their facades carved with solemn columns, promising safety, promising permanence in a world that had learned too often how fragile promises could be. The architects of this new security were dreamers of a peculiar kind, men who saw not just wealth in gold, but the idea of trust itself. They believed that if they could lock away dreams behind doors too heavy to move and codes too complex to speak aloud, then perhaps the world could sleep without fear. And so they built vaults of impossible depth, sealed chambers beneath rivers, corridors guarded by clockwork locks, and mechanisms that sighed softly like sleeping beasts. Each key became a relic, each code a secret known to only a chosen few. But even as the world tried to secure its dreams, there were others watching. Men and women with eyes tuned to patterns, with patience sharper than any blade. They studied blueprints stolen from draftsmen's tables, watched the habits of guards who never varied their routes, counted the seconds it took for a lock to yield to pressure, and listened to the rhythm of tumblers as if they were notes in a quiet song. Among them was a figure known only by whispers in backrooms, a locksmith turned illusionist, a mind shaped by precision and quiet obsession. He understood that every fortress carries within it a single breath of weakness, a point of trust misplaced, a seam that could be teased apart with enough patience. He travelled under many names, moving between cities where wealth slept heavily beneath marble floors. To some, he was a craftsman, to others a scholar of locks, but to those who watched closely, he was a ghost who left behind no trace but the lingering question of how. It began with a vault built to hold the treasury of a city-state, a masterpiece of security, watched day and night by men in polished boots, its doors sealed with gears that turned only to the song of a precise key. The vault was said to be impregnable, a place where the city's hopes rested, stacked in bars and coins, untouchable. Yet one morning, when dawn spilled across the cobblestones, the guards found the door open, not broken, not forced, but unlocked, as though it had grown weary and chosen to yield. The gold was gone, not all of it, just enough to wound pride, to whisper that even dreams behind iron were still vulnerable to hands that understood their language. No alarms had been tripped, no keys stolen. It was as if the vault itself had chosen to betray its keepers. The city panicked. Officials demanded explanations that would not come. The locksmith was gone, vanishing into the haze of another place, another challenge. Soon, vaults across Europe began to change. Locks became more intricate, built with layers upon layers, mechanisms that could resist even the most delicate touch. Banks no longer trusted single keys. Codes were split, shared among many, so that no one person could ever hold full power. Dreams, it seemed, needed to be divided to remain safe. But still the whispers persisted, of treasures that disappeared without force or sound, of safes opened with impossible precision, of vaults that sighed open as if responding to a memory only the thief could hear. Each heist became a lesson, each loss a step toward greater caution. The locks grew heavier, the walls thicker, and yet the world could not silence the quiet minds that loved puzzles more than profit. They did not steal for greed, but for the strange poetry of proving that no dream, however tightly bound, could be truly caged. And so the war between lock and key, between guard and ghost, became an endless dance, one side forever building, the other forever listening, feeling for the heartbeat of weakness hidden beneath layers of certainty. Centuries passed, and the world learned to guard its treasures not just with walls, but with silence. Banks buried their vaults beneath cities, governments sealed archives in mountains, and wealth moved in whispers through wires and signals that no hand could touch. Yet still, somewhere in the hum of electricity, in the pulse of coded vaults that hide fortunes behind glowing screens, the same old melody lingers, a promise that what is locked will always invite a mind to open it. And so, when we speak of safety, of treasures kept beyond reach, we are really speaking of trust. And trust, as history has taught again and again, is the most fragile lock of all. For every vault built, there waits a dreamer listening, fingers tracing unseen seams, eyes half closed in the quiet hum of thought, searching for the moment when the world's certainty becomes soft enough to yield. And when that moment comes, as it always does, a door will open without a sound, and the dream the world tried so hard to keep will walk out into the night, free once more. Because the story of every heist is not one of theft, but of understanding, a dialogue between what is hidden and what longs to be found. And the world, in learning to lock its dreams, also learned that dreams, by their nature, do not wish to be kept. And now, as the candles burn low and the echoes of old footsteps fade into silence, we find ourselves at the edge of another forgotten story. Tonight we drifted through still counting houses and quiet vaults, where shadows moved with patience, and gold shimmered in the hush between heartbeats. We heard the whispers of unseen hands, the careful turning of keys, the quiet courage of those who walked through darkness, seeking treasures locked behind trust. These were not the loud moments of history, no banners, no battle cries, only the soft rustle of parchment and the faint ring of a coin falling into a waiting palm. And in those silences, we found something familiar, a reminder that even in the calmest corners of the past, human longing stirs quietly, reaching for what glimmers just beyond reach. Tell me, as you listened, what did you feel? Was it the stillness of candlelight, the patience of hands that move unseen, or the uneasy beauty of realizing that every locked door hums softly with possibility? Down in the comments, I'd love to know what stayed with you. Was it a sound, a feeling, a single image from the shadows of history? Each story means something a little different to every listener who drifts through it. And maybe, in sharing your thoughts, you'll leave behind a whisper of your own, a trace for another wanderer to find. If this quiet journey has soothed your thoughts, if it helped you drift closer to rest, then let it not end here. There are more stories waiting, gentle, strange, woven through the centuries like soft threads of moonlight. So before you close your eyes, tap the subscribe button and let this small corner of calm return to you again. Each night, another quiet voice to guide you through the forgotten corridors of time. Sleep well, dream softly, and remember, even the stillest moments can hold the greatest secrets. Good night.